Hi, this is Eric from Cafe Watercolor and welcome to this new painting demo. Today we're going to take a look at this painting that I painted of San Gabriel Valley in California. Now, just like any other painting that I did, I started painting with a drawing. Now, I've been getting some feedback that the drawing is really hard to see in the video, and I do apologize for that. But usually the drawing is very light. I just really barely touch the paper with my pencil. So the pencil marks are very light. I can see them a little bit. But the main purpose of the drawing for me is usually just get the feel of the form. So as I look at the reference, I pretty much just let the pencil go and try to block out a big shape and then get the feel of the form and the things that I see from the reference. Now there are two stages of the drawing. The first stage is for me to just get the feel of the overall scenery, so it's mostly just fast, loose, long line. And they're very light, so you can probably barely see them. But after that is done, is what I'm doing right now. I'm starting to slow down a little bit and just starting to draw some darker and slower marks. And this is also the time that I start to incorporate perspective. So most of the street scenery I use 1-point perspective, including this one. If you think about it, a lot of time we looking at things, especially sceneries, in 1-point perspective. And most of the reason is because we look forward when we walk, when we drive, and just basically when we are moving, we are looking into a direction, we're looking ahead. So if you like in the office or something, you walk down the hallway, most of the things you see are going to be in 1-point perspective. And if you're on the street, if you're on a sidewalk like this one, you are looking forward as well, and things should be following 1-point perspective. Now, there are times that you're looking at things more at the corner at an angle, so there's 2-point perspective. But for the most part, I use 1-point perspective just for the scenery. So 1-point perspective is probably the easiest out of 1-point, 2-point, and 3-point. But it's also very easy to read and very simple. And at the same time, it's actually very realistic because that's most of the time, that's how we look at things. That's how we look at a scenery, especially for a street scenery like this. So the church that I'm drawing right now, this is First Evangelical Church in San Gabriel Valley. It is a Mandarin speaking church that I have been to for about a good 3 to 4 years. This place is actually very special to me because I spent quite a bit of my college years there, and I met a pastor who was a very good mentor of mine, and he taught me a lot of things. I was at the stage that I'm feeling a little bit lost in my early 20s, and he really guided me through those tough years because my father is not around a lot. So he really showed me a lot of things that just kind of helped me to become more mature. So his birthday is actually approaching, so I am doing this painting just to going to be his birthday gift from me. So it's a way for me to sort of honor him and just to thank him for all the things that he has done for me. And that is also a very interesting thing when it comes to painting a scenery like this. For the most people, it might just be a very typical scenery painting of a street that's during the sunset with car driving with a church in the background. But for the people who actually know the place and have a personal connection to the place like me and the pastor that I'm going to give this painting to, there's a special meaning to that. And I think as an artist, it is our privilege and our blessing that we are able to take a very ordinary subject like this and make it into something special. I'm not just painting a street scenery, I'm also painting the memories that the people have, that people have connection with this place. I am making this place special, and I am doing this painting so when people look at it, when people do have a connection with this place, when they look at this, it will trigger their memories. Now the memory can be good or it can be bad, but the important thing is it makes people feel something. It makes some people feel something. And a painting itself doesn't have to have this very profound, convoluted message to it. It can really just be simply a painting of scenery, but for the people who care, for the people who have a connection to this place, it means special to them. And that's something I definitely want to do. I just really want to faithfully reproduce that memory, that connection with the people, instead of trying to create something completely new, trying to have this profound message to that. And there's nothing wrong with artists like that. There's nothing wrong with artwork that do that. And I actually admire those art a lot. But it's just for me personally, I am not somebody who do a lot of invention in that aspect. So anyways, back to the drawing. The drawing is actually almost finished, and you can probably see a lot better now because I put down all the darker marks. And if you look at the drawing as a whole, you can actually tell the composition already. So during the drawing stage, it is very, very important that you figure out your perspective, your structures, the shape and composition. Those are the things that you don't want to worry about that much when you start to paint. When you start to paint, you start to worry about making clean washes, mixing colors, and the shape of your brushstroke and things like that. So if you're still struggling with perspective and structures and dimensionality and composition even, you are setting yourself up for a lot of trouble because you're going to worry about too many things at once. And watercolor is all about timing. So if you spend too much time feeling lost and confused, you are not spending time painting and making decisions. So this is one of the most important things about drawing before you paint, is because you try to plan for your painting. Like Ben Franklin says, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So this is, again, I've been mentioning it before, the importance of your fundamental and the importance of planning for your painting. And now that I look at this drawing again, I realize that the drawing is actually quite tight. And I think that is okay. I personally much rather to have a tight but accurate drawing than a very sloppy drawing to start off with. Here I'm trying to adjust the height of the street light. I don't want it to be really tall and competing with the church buildings in the background. And I add another one just right next to the church building, and I feel that will just give it a little bit more sense of depth. And now I start in the painting process, and I first start trying to mix some nice warm color because I know the sky is going to have some sunset warmth to it. So it's very important that I do have enough mixture for those. So some warm pile on the right, and now I'm mixing some cool pile on the left. In my palette, you can probably see I lay out my color from cool to the left to warm to the right, so that I can very easily access all the colors that I need. And when I'm mixing those colors, I don't really think about the formula and don't think about this color plus this color is that color. I'm just thinking about warm and cool. So the top of the sky is cooler, and as it approaches the horizon, I'm starting to make a lot warmer because of the haze and stuff, especially in California near the downtown LA area. You get a lot of haze, so during the sunset time, you get a lot of warmth around the horizon area. So I make it a lot warmer, and I also starting to leave some incidental highlight just to give it a little bit more sense of details and the distance. So those little highlight can give some sense of details without actually painting them in the background. And I try to carefully preserve the highlight for the car by not painting over them. But I do paint over the windshield because most of the windshield are going to be a lot darker. and I continue to wash down, notice that I don't go back up. I just keep going down. And to be completely honest with you, I am not completely satisfied with the first wash. I feel the warmth comes in a little bit too early. I was planning to have the warmth of the haze in the sky and a little bit more at the bottom that is closer to the horizon. The transition is starting a little bit too early. But I think the important thing is knowing when to stop. So even I'm not completely satisfied with the first wash, I don't go back up trying to fix it because it is already starting to dry. So it's very important that you know to leave it alone and just keep going. And when you start to paint the house and everything else, the first wash of the sky will fade back tremendously and will probably be less significant than you think. So the first wash is dry, and now I'm starting to paint the second wash, and I start with the top of the church building. And I mix a consistency that I think is dark enough, but it's also not too dry. So when I put it down, I think the value is a little bit dark, but when it dries, it's going to be a lot lighter. The more water in your mixture, the lighter it's going to dry. So that's something to keep in mind. And this sort of stuff kind of comes with experience. So the more you paint, the more you work on it, the more you observe the property of watercolor, the more you're going to be familiar with that. And you will have more confidence to mix the right intensity for your painting. And my suggestion, if you're just getting started, is to stay on the lighter side, because watercolor is not reversible. You cannot paint over a lighter value over a dark value. So it's from dark to light. So if you go too dark too quickly, you're not able to reverse that. So if you want to stay on the safer side, make something that's a little bit lighter. You can always paint it over and make it darker later on after it's dry. And especially for the background building like this, you really don't want to make anything too dark. You want them to sit back and you want them to work together as a single shape. So really be careful, especially that's the first thing you paint. Don't try to go too dark too quickly. If you try to go too dark too quickly, everything will become muddy very quickly. So keep that beautiful transparent quality of watercolor. Now I'm slowing down a little bit because I'm trying to define the roof of this building. But I need to be careful not to be too slow because I do want this to be a one clean wash. So if I slow down too much, if I bog down by detail too much, I'm going to risk the wash to be dry. And I want it to be one continuous wash just because it will look a lot more fluid and cleaner. So it is September now, and last year around this time I started to launch my online course, the Watercolor Essential. And as I'm doing this video right now, I'm actually preparing for relaunching the course this year. And I prepare a lot more content for the people who already purchased the course. So I am going to actually release a web seminar very soon. Just talk about a couple things about watercolor and also talk a little bit about the course. So if you're interested, definitely remember to be on my mailing list. I'll be sending you out. It is about 40 minutes worth of information and things about watercolor, my personal painting journey from the beginner to where I am right now. And I'm also sharing the 5 mistakes that I find out about watercolor that most people make. So be sure to be on my mailing list if you're interested to go to the web seminar. And let's go back to the painting. So you might notice, and I haven't mentioned this before, but you might notice that the reference photo is looking rather odd. It's kind of wacky, and you're seeing some weird things like ghost images of the car and the distortion is actually pretty heavy. And the reason for that is because the photo is not taken by me. Those are the captures that I made from Google Maps. So I go to the street view and I look for a nice angle for me to reference from. And I merged a few different photos together, so I'm picking different parts of the photo that I want, and I take some other part of some other photo and put it into this photo so I have a nice image. And at the same time, when I am using a Google Maps Street View image, I need to be careful because the perspective is a lot more extreme, because the lens that they're using is very, very wide. And at the same time, the eye level is different. Google Street View image is taken by a truck with a camera on top of the car. So when I'm using those photos, I need to change the eye level if I want to make it believable. So those are the things that you want to watch out for. So now before the wash is dry, I extend the wash from the background to the car in the foreground here. I start to do that quite a bit when I'm doing street scenery, just because it have a nice connection and that will make the shape look a lot better. And if you can connect shape like that, it just feels a lot more fluid and feels a lot more together. While the wash is still wet, I do some wet on wet detail on that. I mix a dark mixture so that I can have some value variation within that wash. So usually a little bit darker and the windshield area, so it feels like there's some reflection, but also the bottom of the car, the wheel, so it feels heavier on the bottom because there's more shadows on the bottom. And before that's dry, I also connect the wheel to the shadow that is casting by the car, so everything is more or less connected. So the second wash from the right side is mostly done. So the best thing I can do is to leave it alone and start to work on somewhere else. So I haven't painted the background mountains, and I actually should have done that first, but I just really want to paint the church building first, so I saved the background mountain for later. But it's really not that big of a deal if you know what you're doing. So just very simple, a few brush stroke and just a really big shape to just get that mountain in. It's way in the distance, so you really don't need a lot of details for that. It should be really faded back, just keep the shape, and very, very light as well. And before the wash of the mountain is dry, I'm just starting to do some very soft details in the distance. So things like trees in the distance, house, vegetations, whatever it is, just some abstract shape. I do that while the wash is still wet, so it can kind of softly blend everything in while still have a little bit of value variations and retain their shape a little bit. They're just very soft shape in the distance, and those are perfect to convey the depths that you want. And now I'm just putting down marks in the distance. So this little short brushstroke and things like that, those are mostly visual languages. So a little bit of details here and there to hint there are things in the background. But I also are not trying to desperately define what those are. Those are way in the distance, so little visual noise like that here and there gives people the space to imagine there are things in the background. We just need to give them enough hint so their brain will sort of just finish the rest of the information for them. And visual language like this are very important if you are looking to create a loose painting. And a lot of people mistaken a loose painting with a fast, sloppy painting. And I am all for painting loose, but I don't like sloppy painting. So what I mean by that is a lot of paintings that I see when people trying to approach to paint a loose looking painting, they're just going very, very fast. But for me, speed comes by experience and how familiar you are with watercolor and the subject. It's not by just forcing it. If you're just trying to paint fast and you're just trying to make quick brushstroke and making different marks without thinking, your painting is not going to look as good, in my opinion, because you don't really think about what you're painting. And if you think about what you're painting, it usually turns out a little bit more believable and convincing. So now I'm painting the tree that is kind of covering the church building. I add those in myself actually because I don't want to paint so much architectural details on the church building. I want some trees in the front. So a very important thing about tree is that it's just a big shape. And I'm not trying to paint individual leaves. So I usually just pre-wet the surface and I mix a nice warmish green color and start to just glide my brush across it. So I got this nice variation of wet and dry marks. And when I'm trying to paint trees, I try to be delicate with it so there's some nice silhouette and shape to it. And with the tree wash, I extend the wash to the left and start to give some shadow details for the church building. And those are the very important things. And now I'm painting the shadow under the roof. This is by far probably one of the most important things for the church building because it just gives it that dimensionality, give that structure and depth. So from a flat shape with some shadows and some visual language hinting there's a structure, now it looks a lot more dimensional. And since I'm painting the darker area of the church building, I also decided to connect those dark area into the figures there. The figures are pretty small because it's more into the distance. So just a little bit hint will really do it. Now I'm painting the shadow of the tree. Again, it's not in the photo, but I think it's correct if I add that in because the light is coming from way to the left. So every shadow are going to shoot to the right and they're quite long because the sun is pretty low. So the tree is casting shadow to the right on the church building. And now you might notice that most of the dark on the church building are more or less connected. And that's the beauty of watercolor. You connect them, you blend them together naturally with washes. So now I'm painting the tree on the right, which is probably also a little bit closer to you in the painting. And I'm painting some dark shape above the car in the foreground. And the reason I do that is just to bring out the contrast of the car's highlight on the top. So the car will kind of pop out a little bit more, just to pull them forward a little bit more because it is closer to us. And whatever the dark shape is I'm painting, I actually don't really know. I just know it has to be there. So for the most cases when you're painting houses for street sceneries, buildings and things like that, it's usually heavier on the bottom and lighter on the top. And the reason is pretty simple because the light is usually from top to bottom. I'm not talking about the sun, I'm talking about the atmosphere, the skylight. And the bottom there's more shadow because there's more object, there's more people and things like that, so there's more occlusion overall. So there's more shadows on the bottom. So the buildings and stuff is usually heavier on the bottom. And at the same time, you want something on the street level to be a little bit darker, so the figures in the car and things like that will pop out a little bit more. So I'm doing another car on the street. So same thing, just paint a value, a wet wash for the windshield, and you come back in for a darker mixture. And the same thing here, one wash, one shape. So the car here, I'm trying to make just one wash aside from the windshield. The body of the car, the wheel, into the shadow that goes to the right is all one single wash. And the car itself, I don't want to give it too much detail. For me, those are just different shapes that plays different role. Even though cars are interesting things to paint, I really want this to belong to the same scenery that I'm painting for the rest of the painting. So if I all of a sudden give the car so much details compared to the rest of the painting, I'm making the painting unbalanced. So this is why the shape itself is more important than all the details that I do. Now it makes a nice warm color for the head, the face of the figures in the background. Just a little bit of that, and that really makes a difference, and that really defines the figure a lot more. And I also use red and orange for the color of the tail light for the car. Now another car into the distance, I make it even more simple. Because all we really need is a windshield and the body of the car and the cast shadow that it is casting on, so it feels like it's sitting on the surface. So the painting is pretty much half done, and I was pretty happy with the progress that I made. Because the most important thing in this painting is probably the church building and all the lighting and the shadow details that's on the building. How do I make it not flat? And how do I make it not so complicated? Those are the things that's most stressful when I was painting. So those are done. Everything else just kind of fall into the place. And I'm painting the car that is facing us on the left. And I started to find out that I'm using a lot more wet onto wet nowadays because I'm getting a lot more familiar with watercolor. So I'm a lot more confident to experiment with different ways of painting. And for me to do wet on wet, you need a lot of confidence that you need to understand the property of watercolor. But when you are sort of brave enough and you understand and familiar with the property of watercolor, wet onto wet is probably the funnest thing you can do during your painting the watercolor. So once again, the dark of the car extend to the left into the figures. Now the shadows that I paint are the shadows from the car and the things on the left. These cast shadows are very, very important. Those cast shadows serve another visual clue for the perspective. You see the shadow in the distance, the cast shadow in the distance, they are a lot shorter than the one in the front because the things in the front are a lot closer to you, so the shadows are bigger. But the shape of the shadow also leads you into the scenery itself as well. You probably noticed the car on the left. I merged the bottom of the car, the wheel, into the shadow, just make them sit there together as one big shape. So you probably see the composition of the whole painting now. Now that everything is mostly painted, we got a major shape of the church building on the right, actually the upper right as well. And we have the car and the shadow and the figures and the left and at the bottom as well. So these two big shapes sort of just balancing each other. They are not the same. Your eyes will still go to the church building a lot more just because the amount of details and the contrast it has. But the painting as a whole doesn't feel imbalanced. It feels balanced because of these two big shapes that's working together. And it creates a very nice composition and scale reference as well. The overall painting is mostly done, so right now I'm just painting some of the darker essence, little details that's going to help the overall painting. So in this case, the street light and the electric pole on the left. So I'm trying to be careful to do it by hand. And those serves a nice composition device as well. It connects the ground to the sky, visually speaking. So those little things, those little tall things that goes into the distance and the horizontal shape that they have, like the street lamp and things like that, those are very, very important for the whole painting. They won't change the look of a painting. If your painting have a nice composition to start off with, it will enhance it. But if your painting doesn't really have a strong composition and you're already messing it up with a lot of things, little detail like those is not going to save the painting. So it is very, very important, again, that you plan for your painting, you figure out the major shape of your painting. All these little details, the street light, the electric pole, the electric wire, and things like that, even the figure sometimes, those are not the essential element for a successful painting. So if you are at this stage and you're not happy with what you have, you should probably accept the fact that this painting is not going to be as successful as you think. And this is also the stage that you're either enjoying your painting a lot because it's going well and you have the confidence and you start to add some more details and you play with it a little bit more, you're having a lot of good times. Or this can also be the stage that is just very discouraging and you're very frustrated because it doesn't look the way you want it to. So we all been through that, and a lot of right information and training will definitely help you to get to the point that you are happy with a lot easier. But you do need to remember that everybody sort of goes through this stage. So this is again a very important thing that you plan for your painting. If you plan your painting well, the composition and the value, everything works together very, very well, your painting will be likely more successful. And this is why I used to say that you need to have a vision for your painting. You need to at least can able to imagine how the painting is going to look like at the end before you start to paint it. If you're trying to figure that out in the middle of the painting, you are pretty much setting yourself up for failure. It might still turn out pretty well, but you know that's probably just some happy accident happening, which is fine if that's all you're trying to do. But if you want a repeatable and predictable result, you definitely want to plan it better. So the sky is a little bit empty, so I painted some birds. It's just to make the space look a little bit more dimensional with a little bit more depth. And some darker details here and there. The red for the tail lights there. Just some little tiny touches before we finish the painting. What I always say is that if you start to asking yourself where else you should be painting, then it's probably a good sign that you should be stopping. Because if you're just starting looking for places to put more marks down, then it's very, very likely that you are putting too much details. Probably one of the biggest thing that students telling me is that they tend to overdo the detail. They tend to put too much detail. And I think it's because a lot of time we don't know when to stop. We want to just do a little bit more, and we're hoping that some more detail is going to make the painting look better. While it can help the painting, but it's not going to change the painting as a whole. So knowing when to stop is very, very important for watercolor. Because once you paint something down, you are not able to remove it. So before you paint anything, always ask yourself if that is necessary. Now I'm just doing a glaze over the road because I feel it's a little bit too light. And there we have it. Here's some detail of the painting. I really hope you enjoyed this painting. I really enjoy this painting and I like how it turns out. Again, the course is going to launch pretty soon, and I also offer a free web seminar, so be sure to go to my website and sign up to get a free PDF guide and the upcoming web seminar as well. Thank you, and I will see you guys again soon.